People say the most painful betrayal comes from lies, yet the most ruthless betrayal comes from silent nods. I spent my youth building an empire from rubble, only to find my husband using my sweat to buy fake peace for his mother and sister. They thought my well was endless. They did not know I held the valve, and I decided to shut it tight right before their biggest thirst. Hello. Dear listeners of Violet Revenge Stories, YouTube has disabled our channel's monetization feature, leaving us with no budget to operate. So if you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1. Your kindness helps us pay our hardworking staff so they can sustain their livelihoods and continue creating these stories for you. And you can easily support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the donation link in the description or comments below. My name is Quinn Castillo. I am 38 years old, and I am the founder of Etheria Architectural Restoration, based right here in the rainy heart of Seattle. We are a company dedicated to reviving historical buildings. It is not a glamorous job. It is not about sitting in a pristine office pointing at color swatches. My work demands absolute precision and an immense amount of grueling physical labor. I spend my days covered in centuries of dust, standing on shaky scaffolding in the freezing rain, meticulously restoring ornate terracotta facades and carving intricate wooden moldings that time has forgotten. Every single dollar I have ever earned was paid for with calloused hands, aching joints, and sleepless nights poring over massive rolls of architectural blueprints. I built my company from nothing but sheer willpower and a stubborn refusal to quit. My husband, Julian Vance, was my opposite in many ways. He is a landscape architect, a man who designs serene gardens and perfectly manicured lawns. Julian has an incredibly warm exterior, the kind of inviting presence that makes strangers feel instantly comfortable. However, underneath that charming smile is a man who is terrified of conflict. Julian would run miles in the opposite direction, rather than engage in an argument or set a boundary. In his family, he has always played the role of the ultimate peacemaker, smoothing out every ruffled feather and nodding along to avoid upsetting anyone. I used to think his easygoing nature brought balance to my intense, driven personality. I never realized that his inability to stand firm would eventually rot the very floorboards of our marriage. About 5 years ago, as my business finally began to turn a significant profit, I opened a high-tier corporate credit card. It was meant to be a smart financial move. The card offered incredible reward points, which I planned to use for our future travels or emergency funds, because my days were so heavily consumed by the chaos of construction sites. I handed the card over to Julian. I trusted him completely. I asked him to manage it for our shared household expenses, paying for the mortgage, groceries, and the occasional date night. It felt good to provide, to know that my hard work was making our lives easier and more comfortable. But that comfort quickly became a magnet for his family. It started quietly. His mother, Beatrice, and his younger sister, Clara, began asking to borrow the card. Their excuses were always wrapped in a veil of innocence. They needed to buy small household items, they claimed, a new set of organic cotton sheets for the guest room, or a specialty coffee maker because Beatrice read it was better for her digestion. Whenever I raised a tired eyebrow, Julian would wrap his arms around me and kiss my forehead. They are family, Quinn. We have plenty right now, so there is no need to be calculating about every little thing, he would say, his voice dripping with that soothing tone he always used to disarm me, and I let it go. I was simply too exhausted to fight. When you spend 10 hours a day breathing in toxic fumes and negotiating with stubborn contractors, the last thing you want to do is come home and argue about a coffee maker. I left the bank notifications and the monthly statements entirely in Julian's hands. I thought I was delegating a chore to a partner I could trust. Instead, I was handing over the keys to the vault. As the months rolled into years, my relentless dedication to my craft slowly morphed into a silent utility for my in-laws. They began to view my success not as something to be respected, but as a communal trough meant to elevate their own lifestyles. Beatrice and Clara lived soft, unbothered lives. They did not know what it meant to skip lunch to finish a cement pour, or to wake up at 4 in the morning to review safety protocols. Yet, they were the first to stand at family gatherings holding crystal glasses filled with expensive wine, loudly preaching about the beauty of family and the importance of sharing one's blessings. They love the word sharing, but in their vocabulary, sharing only flowed in one direction. I provided the soil, the water, and the back-breaking labor, while they sat back and comfortably harvested the fruit. I was so blinded by the dust of my construction sites that I failed to see how the foundation of my own life was being built on sand, ready to wash away with the next high tide. The innocent requests for household items did not stay innocent for long. Like a leak hidden behind drywall, the spending expanded quietly and destructively. Soon, the cotton sheets and coffee makers morphed into something entirely different. Clara suddenly developed a profound passion for high society art auctions, bidding on abstract paintings that cost more than the scaffolding we rented for an entire season. Beatrice decided that her digestion issues could only be cured by monthly luxury wellness retreats in the mountains, while I was suffocating in the thick, humid dust of historic brickwork. Beatrice was soaking in mineral mud baths that charged hundreds of dollars an hour. The contrast was a physical weight on my chest. I was breaking my back to resurrect forgotten architecture, and they were treating my labor like an infinite fountain of youth for their vanity. All of this was facilitated by Julian. He held the power of the account, and he used it to play the generous king with my treasury. Every time his phone buzzed with a picture of a designer handbag or a brochure for a spiritual healing resort, he never questioned it. He just typed out quick, spineless replies. "Okay, Mom." "Sure, sis." He acted as the perfect filter, burying the exorbitant digital receipts and hiding the sheer volume of their indulgence from my exhausted eyes. He made sure I only saw what he wanted me to see, carefully curating the financial reports during our brief Sunday morning coffee chats before I rushed back to a job site. To guarantee my compliance, his family constructed a brilliant psychological trap. At every dinner party, every holiday gathering, Beatrice would raise her crystal glass and command the room's attention. "To our dear Quinn, the most generous woman in the world. We are so blessed to have such a successful and giving soul in our family," she would announce. The guests would applaud, and Clara would chime in with sweet agreements. They used public flattery to chain me to their escalating expenses. How could the most generous woman in the world possibly complain about a weekend retreat or a canvas covered in paint splatters? I would force a smile, my muscles screaming from a 14-hour shift, completely unaware that their toasts were just invoices wrapped in compliments. Meanwhile, I started feeling an invisible squeeze. The company's cash flow, usually a roaring river, felt like it was slowing to a cautious stream. Assuming the local economy was just taking a natural dip, I began aggressively cutting my own personal expenses. I canceled my gym membership. I skipped our planned weekend getaway to the coast, telling Julian we needed to tighten our belts. I even delayed replacing my heavy-duty safety boots. The steel toes were exposed, the leather cracking, and the soles peeling, but I glued them back together to save a couple of $100s. I was rationing my own oxygen so his family could keep breathing their rarefied air. The friction finally sparked during a casual family brunch at Beatrice's house. I was drinking my lukewarm coffee when Clara floated into the living room, cradling a massive, intricately painted antique ceramic vase. As someone who restores historical artifacts, I have a sharp eye for antiquities. I knew exactly what era that glaze belonged to, and I knew the market value. That single piece of pottery cost exactly what I paid my master foreman for an entire month of back-breaking labor. My heart skipped a beat, a sudden rush of panic flooding my veins. "Clara, that piece is museum quality," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "How did you manage to get that at the auction?" Clara did not even blink. She gently set the vase on the mantel and gave a dismissive wave of her perfectly manicured hand. "Oh, I just fell in love with it, and Julian said he would take care of it," she replied, her tone as casual as if she were talking about buying a loaf of bread. A freezing knot formed in the pit of my stomach. The math in my head was colliding violently with reality. Julian's salary as a landscape architect could never casually absorb a purchase like that without a serious conversation. Suspicion, sharp and bitter, finally pierced through my exhaustion. I opened my mouth to demand an explanation, to ask what exactly she meant by taking care of it, but before the words could leave my throat, my phone rang. It was an emergency call from my lead engineer regarding the upcoming City Historical Square restoration, a massive project that could define the next decade of my career. The pressure of the impending deadline crashed down on me, drowning out the warning sirens in my head. I swallowed my questions, grabbed my keys, and ran out the door toward the construction site, leaving the antique vase and the growing cracks in my marriage behind. I convinced myself I was just being paranoid, utterly oblivious to the fact that the roof was already caving in. The opportunity of a lifetime arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. The City Council officially announced the open bidding for the City Historical Square restoration project. This was not just another job. It was the crown jewel of our district, a sprawling 19th century plaza featuring ornate bronze statues, a towering Gothic clock face, and thousands of intricate cobblestones that had been trampled by time. Winning this contract meant elevating Etheria architectural restoration from a respected local contractor to a premier regional firm. It was the kind of legacy project that would secure our reputation and our livelihoods for the next decade. I poured every ounce of my energy into preparing the proposal, working late into the night, sketching structural reinforcements, and calculating material yields. However, a project of this magnitude came with a colossal bureaucratic hurdle. To even be considered by the review board, I had to prove an airtight financial capacity and secure a massive surety bond from the city. They needed an absolute guarantee that my company possessed the liquid assets and immaculate credit history to back up a multi-million-dollar public works contract. If Etheria collapsed mid-project, the bond would protect the taxpayers. It was standard procedure for government bids, something I had done on a smaller scale dozens of times. I confidently hired an independent financial consulting firm to conduct the mandatory audit and prepare the bonding paperwork. I expected a routine sign-off. I expected them to look at our steady stream of completed contracts and give us the green light. Instead, I got Marcus. Marcus was a senior auditor with a demeanor as rigid as reinforced concrete. He walked into my makeshift office at the shipyard, carefully avoiding the piles of blueprints and sawdust. He did not offer a polite greeting or engage in small talk. He simply unclasped his leather briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of printed financial reports, and laid them flat on my desk. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly heavy. The hum of the heavy machinery outside seemed to fade into a distant buzz. "Quinn, we have a critical situation," Marcus said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "I have spent the last 48 hours reviewing your ledgers to prepare the surety bond application. I cannot submit this to the bonding agency. If I do, they will not just reject your bid, they will flag your business as a high-risk entity." I stared at him, genuinely confused, wiping a streak of mortar off my cheek. My company was highly profitable. We had 0 missed payrolls. "Marcus, that makes no sense," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "We just finished 3 commercial facades last quarter. Our receivables are solid. What are you looking at?" He slid a specific page across the desk, tapping his pen against a highlighted column. "Your receivables are fine. Your operational revenue is fine. But your corporate credit utilization is an absolute disaster. You have a gaping cash flow black hole on your primary business card. The debt ratio has been pinned at 98% of your maximum limit for the past 7 months, because this is a business line tied to your personal guarantee. Your credit score is in a freefall. It has dropped over 200 points since last spring." The oxygen vanished from the room. My lungs refused to expand. I grabbed the paper, my calloused fingers leaving faint dirt smudges on the pristine white edges. The numbers printed there made absolutely no logical sense to me. The balance on the corporate rewards card was staggering. It looked like the operating budget for a small startup. not a standard expense account. The silence in the room stretched out, thick and suffocating. Marcus did not break eye contact. He was a man who dealt in facts, and the facts were telling him that my company was bleeding out from a severed artery. I tried to inhale, but my chest felt banded in iron. I pulled the master ledger toward me, my eyes scanning the heavily redacted summary lines. It was a chaotic blur of numbers, but the final balance at the bottom right corner was crystal clear. It was a massive, crushing weight of compound interest and revolving credit that I had never authorized, never seen, and never anticipated. Marcus continued speaking, but his words felt like physical blows landing against my chest. To secure a bond of this size, you need a flawless debt-to-income ratio. Right now, your profile looks like a company quietly drowning in undisclosed liabilities. No underwriter will touch this. You are functionally insolvent on paper. The magnitude of the crisis crashed over me like a collapsed retaining wall. This was not just about missing out on a prestigious public square. If my credit was this severely compromised, my existing suppliers would start demanding cash up front for materials. My current commercial loans could be called in early due to covenant breaches. Every single plan I had mapped out for the next 5 years dissolved in an instant. The new heavy-duty cranes we needed to purchase. The annual bonuses I had promised my lead sculptors. I looked around my office, picturing the faces of the 40 master craftsmen out in the yard, men and women who had stood by me through freezing winters and grueling deadlines. I was suddenly facing the terrifying reality that I might lose my life's work. I might have to look my loyal crew in the eyes and tell them I could no longer make payroll. All because of an invisible financial tumor I knew nothing about. The empire I had built from rubble was teetering on the edge of a cliff, and I had absolutely no idea who had pushed it. The digital clock on the nightstand shifted to 3 o'clock in the morning. The house was completely silent, swallowed by the heavy, damp darkness of a Seattle night. Down the hall, Julian was breathing softly in our bed, his chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. It was the undisturbed rhythm of a man who had not a single care in the world. I slipped out from under the covers, wrapping a thick robe around my shoulders, and walked into my home office. I closed the door silently behind me, turned on my laptop, and let the cold blue light wash over my face. I bypassed the curated, simplified financial dashboards Julian always printed out for our Sunday morning reviews. I logged directly into the bank's master terminal and requested the raw, unfiltered transaction data files for the past 36 months. I sat there in the dark, my calloused fingers scrolling through line after line of expenditures. What I found in those spreadsheets was not just a case of financial negligence or a husband being too soft on his family. It was a masterpiece of active, calculated deception. Julian had systematically contacted the bank behind my back to increase the spending limit on the corporate card, leveraging my impeccable payment history and the rising revenue of Etheria to open the floodgates. But the limit increases were only the tip of the iceberg. As I cross-referenced the data, I noticed a terrifying pattern in the expense categorization. Massive, unjustifiable charges were hidden under generic, professional-sounding labels. I stared at a charge for $20,000, categorized as structural steel procurement. I traced the merchant identification code. It did not belong to a steel mill or a hardware supplier. It belonged to an exclusive, high-altitude wellness resort in the Swiss Alps, the exact place Beatrice had spent a month last summer. I scrolled further down and found another entry for $12,000, meticulously logged as historical archiving and consultation fees. The merchant was the very same luxury art gallery where Clara had acquired that museum-quality ceramic vase. Julian had deliberately manipulated the accounting software. He used his intelligence, his meticulous attention to detail, and his intimate knowledge of my business operations to manually alter the digital receipts. He built a fortress of lies to protect his mother and sister's parasitic lifestyle. He actively chose to sacrifice my life's work, my professional reputation, and my financial safety just to keep them comfortable and happy. The realization hit me with the devastating force of a wrecking ball. He did not just fail to protect me. He was the one holding the knife. Yet, I did not cry. I did not feel the urge to storm into the bedroom, turn on the harsh overhead lights, and scream at him until my voice went hoarse. True rage, I discovered in the quiet isolation of that room, is not hot or loud. It is absolutely freezing. It is the terrifying, silent clarity of an architect who realizes the foundation of a building is irreparably compromised and must be completely demolished. When a master builder decides to bring down a structure, she does not throw a tantrum. She calculates the blast radius. She places the dynamite. She waits for the perfect moment. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the 24-hour elite corporate banking hotline. "Good morning, corporate services. How can I assist you today?" the representative asked, her voice crisp and professional. "I need to make immediate, sweeping changes to my corporate account," I replied, keeping my voice down to a low, unwavering whisper. "I am the sole proprietary owner. I want the credit limit on the primary expense card reduced immediately. Set the maximum limit to exactly $500. Understood, ma'am." Reducing the limit to $500, the agent confirmed, the sound of rapid typing echoing through the receiver. "Would you like to maintain your current overdraft protection?" "Absolutely not," I stated coldly. "I want all overdraft protections permanently disabled. If any transaction exceeds $500, it is to be brutally and automatically declined. No exceptions." "Done. Is there anything else?" "Yes. I need to open a new, secure checking account under my name only, severing all joint access privileges. Once it is open, execute an immediate wire transfer. Sweep every single cent of the company's liquid reserve funds out of the current account and into the new vault. By the time the sun began to rise, painting the Seattle sky in pale shades of gray, my financial fortress was entirely secure. I had locked the doors, changed the digital combinations, and shut off the valve completely. The infinite well was officially dry. At 7 o'clock, Julian woke up. He walked into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes, wearing a soft cashmere sweater purchased with my sweat. He smiled at me, his handsome face completely oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath his feet had just been vaporized. I handed him a fresh cup of coffee. I smiled back. It was a genuine smile, warm and steady. I knew his family had a massive, incredibly expensive charity event planned for the upcoming weekend. They were anticipating a grand display of wealth and status, entirely funded by my hard work. I kissed my husband on the cheek, grabbed my worn-out hard hat, and walked out the door to go to work. I left them entirely to their own devices, perfectly content to let them march blindly into the beautiful trap I had just set. The evening of the charity gala arrived, draped in velvet and dripping with unearned luxury. Clara had chosen the most exclusive contemporary art gallery in the downtown arts district to host her so-called philanthropic debut. The vast, cavernous room was transformed into a paradise of excess. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over 150 of the city's most influential socialites. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos glided across the polished marble floors, carrying silver trays loaded with imported caviar, truffle tartlets, and champagne that cost $300 a bottle. A live string quartet played a classical symphony in the corner, their music blending with the arrogant laughter of the elite. The sheer scale of the event was nauseating, especially knowing that the massive initial deposit of $25,000 had been swiped on my corporate card just days before I discovered the terrifying truth. Julian looked immaculate in a tailored midnight blue tuxedo. He stood near a towering ice sculpture carved into the shape of a swan, laughing and shaking hands, playing the role of the affluent benefactor to absolute perfection. Beatrice was holding court at the primary VIP table, wearing a custom silk gown and draped in heavy pearls, soaking up the admiration of her wealthy friends. Clara floated between groups, wearing a designer dress that cost more than my entire tool shed, accepting compliments on her exquisite taste and generous spirit. I stood quietly near the back of the room, hidden in the shadows, wearing a simple black dress and nursing a glass of sparkling water. I watched them perform their grand illusion. Knowing exactly how fragile the stage was beneath their feet, I felt no anxiety, only the cold, mechanical precision of a demolition expert, waiting for the timer to hit 0. The timeline I had calculated was flawless. At exactly 8:30 in the evening, right as the appetizer plates were being cleared and the anticipation for the 5-course main dinner peaked, the gallery manager and the lead event coordinator approached the head table. They looked deeply apologetic, but strictly professional. They needed to settle the remaining balance of $42,000 before the kitchen would release the main course. It was standard protocol for large-scale luxury events booked by new clients. I watched Julian smoothly reach into his breast pocket. He pulled out the sleek, heavy metal corporate card with a practiced, arrogant grace and handed it to the manager. The manager inserted the card into the wireless terminal. The machine emitted a sharp, unpleasant beep, declined. Julian chuckled casually, adjusting his silk bow tie. He confidently assured the manager it was a simple bank error and asked him to run it again. The manager obliged, tapping the screen. A second beep echoed, slightly louder this time. Declined. A faint sheen of sweat appeared on Julian's forehead. He asked the manager to try bypassing the chip and swiping the magnetic strip. He tried to maintain his charming smile, but his eyes darted nervously around the table. Third beep, insufficient funds. The transaction was categorically rejected. The gentle hum of conversation at the surrounding tables began to falter. The delay was becoming noticeable. The waiters had stopped moving, waiting for the signal to serve the food. Julian excused himself, his face suddenly pale, and stepped a few feet away to call the 24-hour banking hotline. Beatrice and Clara immediately rushed over to the manager, flashing tight, desperate smiles, attempting to charm their way through the awkward pause. Beatrice assured her wealthy friends that it was just a ridiculous security hold because they spent so much money on their charitable endeavors. That was my cue. I walked slowly across the marble floor. My footsteps echoed, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the murmurs of the confused guests. I reached the head table just as Julian hung up his phone, looking absolutely horrified. The bank had just informed him of the new $500 limit. He looked at me, his eyes wide with sheer panic, realizing that the massive vault he had relied on for years was permanently sealed. I did not yell. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. True power does not need to scream. I simply raised my hand and dropped a massive, heavily bound stack of printed audit files right onto the center of the crisp white tablecloth. The heavy thud rattled the crystal wine glasses, tipping one over and spilling red wine like blood across the white fabric. The sound silenced the immediate vicinity completely. Having some trouble with the catering bill. "Julian?" I asked, my voice cutting through the tension like a steel blade. "Please," Julian whispered, his charming facade completely crumbling into dust. "Not here. Let us go outside to the parking lot and talk about this quietly." "We do not need to go outside," I replied, maintaining a deadpan, chilling tone. "I think your family and your esteemed guests would love to hear all about your highly creative accounting skills. Why is the card declining?" "Julian, could it be because you have drained the maximum limit paying for things like structural steel procurement?" I flipped the heavy folder open, exposing the brightly highlighted bank records. I slid a page toward Beatrice, right past her expensive appetizer plate. "Tell me, Julian," I continued, keeping my eyes locked onto his terrified, sweaty face. "When did structural steel procurement start taking place at a luxury wellness resort in the Swiss Alps? Why did we pay $30,000 for raw iron at a mudbath facility? And when did historical archiving fees start funneling into contemporary art galleries to buy antique ceramic vases for your sister?" The silence in the gallery became absolute and deafening. The string quartet had stopped playing. The waiters stood frozen like statues. Every single guest in the vast room was staring directly at our table, hanging onto every single word. "You forged the expense categories," I stated, the words falling like heavy stones upon his chest. "You deliberately manipulated my corporate ledger. You committed financial fraud against my company. You put my entire livelihood, my reputation, and the jobs of 40 hardworking masons and carpenters at severe risk, just so your mother could sit in mineral baths and your sister could play high society art collector. Look at them. Look at the people you stole from me to impress. Tell them. Tell your mother and sister how you really paid for their extravagant lives." Julian was shaking uncontrollably. He looked at the floor, utterly defeated, unable to meet my eyes or the eyes of the stunned guests. "I just wanted to keep everyone happy," he mumbled, his voice breaking into a pathetic whimper. "You were always working at the sites. We had the money coming in. I just changed the names on the spreadsheet so you would not stress over the totals. I was just trying to protect the peace in the family." "You did not protect the peace," I corrected him coldly, my eyes narrow and unforgiving. "You protected your own cowardice. You fed my blood to parasites because you were too weak to say no." Beatrice suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. Her face was flushed dark red with humiliation and fury. She could not handle the devastating reality that her aristocratic image was built on stolen labor. Instead of apologizing, she resorted to her favorite weapon, playing the victim. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "How can you be so incredibly cruel?" Beatrice cried out, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at my chest. "You are completely obsessed with money. You have absolutely no heart. We are your family, and you are humiliating us in front of all our friends over some minor accounting technicality. You are a cold, pragmatic woman who cares more about dirty bricks and cement than her own husband. You never had any class, and now you are ruining our reputation." I looked at her tears. I looked at the ruined makeup and the trembling finger. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just total apathy. "I care about the people who actually work for a living," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent, echoing room. "I built my empire with my own 2 hands, covered in dirt and sweat. You built your empire by acting like leeches on my spine. You talk about class, but there's nothing classy about theft. And tonight, the host is officially evicting you." The aristocratic guest did not offer Beatrice a single ounce of sympathy. The whispers had turned into audible gasps of disgust and harsh judgments. The beautiful illusion of immense wealth was shattered entirely, replaced by the ugly, pathetic reality of theft and grifting. One by one, the elite socialites began picking up their expensive coats and quietly walking toward the exit. They avoided eye contact with Clara and Beatrice, eager to distance themselves from the scandalous spectacle unfolding before them. The charity gala was dead. I turned my attention back to the gallery manager, who was standing frozen in shock, still holding the rejected wireless terminal and the massive final invoice. "The corporate limit on that card has been permanently locked at $500, I announced clearly, making sure Beatrice, Clara, and Julian heard every single syllable loud and clear. "I have not authorized this event. I am not signing that receipt. The bill belongs entirely to them. I suggest you ask the lady in the pearls how she plans to wash dishes in her designer gown." Julian buried his face in his hands, collapsing into his chair. Clara was sobbing loudly now, staring wildly at the empty tables and the retreating guests. Beatrice stood frozen in sheer horror, watching her entire social standing evaporate into thin air in a matter of minutes. I looked at the 3 of them one last time, feeling a profound, incredible sense of lightness in my chest. The heavy burden I had carried for years was finally gone. I turned my back on the lavish decorations, the fake smiles, and the crumbling ruins of their fake dynasty. I walked out the heavy glass doors of the gallery and stepped into the cool, refreshing evening air, leaving them trapped inside the magnificent disaster they had built for themselves. The morning after the gallery disaster, I walked into the financial consultant office with a clear head and a new set of ledgers. With the fraudulent corporate account completely severed and the forged transactions actively under legal dispute, we successfully restructured the company financial profile. It took intense negotiations, but the City Council Review Board finally approved our surety bond application. Etheria Architectural Restoration officially secured the City Historical Square contract, The crisis was averted, and my business was safe. As for Julian, his return home was swift and unceremonious. I packed his clothes into heavy-duty trash bags and left them on the front porch. He had no choice but to move back in with his mother and sister. The atmosphere in that house quickly turned toxic. Without my endless stream of revenue to fund their delusions, reality hit them like a freight train. Clara was forced to frantically liquidate her designer wardrobe and sell off her beloved contemporary art pieces at a massive loss, just to satisfy the furious event coordinator and avoid a devastating civil lawsuit for the unpaid gala invoice. Beatrice became a total recluse. She was too utterly ashamed to show her face at the country club or look her former wealthy friends in the eye, knowing they all viewed her as nothing more than a desperate fraud. The three of them are now crammed together under one roof, suffocating in a bitter environment where they actually have to argue over the electric bill instead of planning luxury vacations. I filed the divorce papers the very next week. My legal team was absolutely ruthless. We cited gross financial misconduct and marital dissipation of assets. I cut off every single financial tie and demanded the immediate recovery of the funds Julian had illegally funneled away. He will be paying me back for a very long time. Today, I woke up at 5 in the morning. I am standing right in the center of the city historical square. The massive yellow construction cranes are roaring to life, and the raw smell of wet cement and fresh earth fills the air. I adjust my heavy protective hard hat and take a deep, long breath of the cool morning wind. For the first time in years, my shoulders feel completely light. I am no longer carrying the crushing weight of ungrateful parasites. I am finally doing what I was always meant to do. I am laying down strong, honest bricks and building a foundation that belongs entirely to me. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. If you found my journey inspiring, please consider supporting the channel with just a $1 donation. You can simply scan the QR code on your screen or click the donation link in the video description or the comment section. Your incredible kindness provides our hardworking staff with the wages they need to feed their families and allows us to keep creating more violent revenge stories for you to enjoy. Stay strong and always protect your own empire.